Welcome back to RAF Lucas in Scotland. Well, in part two, we've got some great flying action coming up. We'll be going to the Royal International Air Tattoo at Fairford, we'll have shows from Woburn and Folkestone in Kent, and of course we'll be seeing what's here at the Battle of Britain Air Show.
But first we go to Duxford in Cambridgeshire for a show that many people think is the best of the year. Now, as well as being part of the Imperial War Museum, Duxford is also home to the biggest collection of vintage warbirds in the country. And this is the show where you'll see them all flying together. Duxford can justly claim to be the home of aviation history in Britain. The airfield itself was an important World War II fighter station. The great Douglas Bader flew from here. It's now the site of two museums. The wonderful new American collection was opened to the public this year. But the great thing about Duxford is that you can see historic planes actually flying. The privately owned fighter collection, also based here, puts on its air show once a year. All of its airworthy machines take to the air, and many more come by invitation. The theme is simple. Everything that flies must date back, at least to the last war, and there are no jets.
Well, all we're seeking to do is to capture a particular age, and the age of the piston is over, as far as aviation is concerned, and the jets are very exciting, but you can see them anywhere, and the difference between a legendary jet is probably just 30 or 40 years now. I just like to capture one particular period, First World War, Second World War, and interwar airplanes, things like the Grumman Goose. Anything that's classic of its kind.
The Westland Lysander, Army Cooperation, short takeoff and landing, single-engined, slow speed. The Bristol Blenheim, multi-role, high speed, hugely successful throughout the whole of World War II. And the Gloucester Gladiator, between the wars, slow biplane, the last of a gentler era of fighters. Now, what do these three very different aircraft have in common? Well, they all use the same, nowadays very rare, engine. It's the 9-cylinder, 900 horsepower radial Bristol Mercury engine. So this is the Mercury engine segment of the display. In fact, there are two Lysanders here today, the only two left flying. One is based here at Duxford with the Aircraft Restoration Company, and the other comes from Belgium, where it belongs to the Sabina old-timers. The Gladiator is unique, the only one left. It belongs to the Shuttleworth collection. It's got an unusual colour scheme this year. These are the markings of a Norwegian Air Force Gladiator in 1940. So not only are these aeroplanes historic in their own individual rights, but flying here together, they make a formation that is unquestionably unique. Because airborne here at Duxford are the only 5 remaining Bristol Mercury engines that are still working anywhere in the world. And what a sweet song they make. There's something else about this formation. When the Blenheim first flew in 1935, the Gladiator was the RAF's fastest fighter, but the new Blenheim was 50 miles an hour faster. It had been designed for business travel, as the 1930s equivalent of the Learjet, if you like. But it was so fast that the Air Ministry immediately ordered 1,134 of them. More than 6,000 were built altogether, and the Blenheim became the only RAF aeroplane to serve in all commands and in every theatre of the war. This one, it's now the only one, this is in the colours of 254 Squadron Coastal Command. This particular aeroplane has an extraordinary history. The British Aerial Museum rebuilt it at Duxford in 1987, but it crashed, no fault of the aeroplane. So they, Graham Warner and John Romaine, they started all over again and they rebuilt it again. It flew again in 1992. And I have to say, this is possibly the most perfect restoration I have ever seen. The company is now called the Aircraft Restoration Company, by the way. And this is their Lysander as well. The Lysander, that despite its unlikely appearance, was actually full of state-of-the-art developments like variable pitch propeller, automatic low-speed handling aids including full-span leading-edge slats, and excellent visibility for the pilot. The Gladiator was both the last of the old and the first of the new. It was a biplane with wheels that didn't retract, but it also had an enclosed cockpit and 4 machine guns. So you could say it was a sort of halfway house between the Spad and the Spitfire. From radial air-cooled Bristol Mercury engine to inline, well V12 anyway, liquid-cooled Rolls-Royce Merlin. Nowadays Bristol and Rolls are one company, but then, 30s and 40s, they were competitors with very different approaches to motive power for aeroplanes. And here we've a rare treat in the way of Merlin-engined beauties, 3 Hurricanes about to fly together. First off is the Fighter Collection's Mark 12A, 12 indicating that it was built in Canada. These are the colours of 71 Eagle Squadron RAF, in which American volunteers flew before the US entered the war. Next is the most recently restored Hurricane, a Mark 12B, colours of 402 Squadron RAF. And finally, a Sea Hurricane Mark 1B, belonging to the Shuttleworth collection. She's marked with the colours of 880 Naval Air Squadron at the time of the Fleet Air Arm's greatest fighter battle, the 1942 fight to protect the Malta convoys. The Hawker Hurricane was the first of the RAF's new fighters in the 30s. It was the service's first monoplane fighter, the world's first 8-gun fighter, and the first combat aeroplane to go faster than 300 miles an hour in level flight. Hurricane was designed by the great Sydney Cam, and it was part of a long line of distinguished Cam aeroplanes. It was descended from the Fury and the Hart, and it was followed by the Hunter and the Harrier. The Hurricane's most famous era was during the Battle of Britain, when it accounted for 3/5 of the enemy aircraft shot down. But it also saw distinguished service as a ground attack fighter carrying bombs, and with later marks carrying 4 20mm cannon, it became an outstanding tank buster in the North African desert. Although it didn't have the grace and charisma of the aeroplane it's usually associated with, the Spitfire, it was extremely tough and rugged, it could withstand much punishment in battle, and it was much loved by its pilots. But next it is the turn of the Spitfires. There are no less than 9 of them at the show. This is one of the big Griffon-engined Mark 14s. It's followed by a Merlin-engined Mark 11 nearer to us, and a Mark 5, the most numerous version of this aircraft. More than 22,000 Spitfires were built altogether. These 3 belong to the Fighter Collection, and they represent important stages in the Spitfire's development. The Mark 5, the main version for the early years of the war, the Mark 9, developed from the 5, and the big Mark 14, the first with the Griffon engine, with a 5-bladed propeller and a retractable tail wheel. But now here's the main adversary for the early years, the Messerschmitt 109. See that hole in the centre of the propeller boss? That was for a 30mm cannon. Now this was Germany's most important fighter of the war. More than 35,000 of them were built. And this is the only genuine version flying, complete with its rare Daimler-Benz engine, being chased by a Mark 9 Spitfire. Nowadays, of course, we have the luxury of 20/20 hindsight, so we're in a position to clarify some of the myths that grew up around these 2 great fighters. How did the Spitfire and the Messerschmitt compare? A few pilots are lucky enough to fly them both.
Trying to compare 2 airplanes is always a big area, and there are some aspects of the Messerschmitt, like diving capability, it will outdive a Spitfire quite easily. There are others, like the takeoff and landing characteristics, that are very tricky on it, so the Spitfire is a lot easier airplane for takeoff and landing. The stalls are very similar on both airplanes, but the control forces are higher in the Messerschmitt, so often for a hard turning manoeuvring type of fight, then it really is both hands on the stick in the Messerschmitt, whereas in the Spitfire you can fight quite happily with one hand.
Now this is a real newcomer to the UK scene. It was flown in from the United States in a crate a mere 8 days before the show. It was put together and painted in time to do its test flight just the day before. The man who was responsible for getting it over here is Stephen Gray, and he's flying his new baby for the first time in a show. The man whose company restored the aircraft to this pristine condition enthused about the differences between this Mustang and the others we already have in Britain.
The major difference is really the cockpit sections. You can see it has a high back like, one of the earlier Spitfires. It's a little faster than the Bubble Canopy D model, and yeah, it's a really nice airplane though. The Merlin engine, it's a higher horsepower engine. It's actually an engine designed to put out a lot of horsepower at altitude, and that's where these fighters in Europe did so well with a Merlin engine, is able to give it full power, maximum horsepower up to 25,000 feet.
In some contrast to the graceful Mustang, here's the biggest, heaviest single-piston engine fighter there's ever been. The B-47 Thunderbolt joins a whole bunch of Mustangs and some other historic types to celebrate the part played by the 8th Air Force in Britain in World War II. Also involved, the B-17 Flying Fortress, here taxiing past Duxford's new American Air Museum. The Mustangs get airborne, followed by the two North American B-25 Mitchell bombers. The first one is from the Duke of Brabant's Air Force, which is a historic collection based in Holland. It's in the colours of the RAF's Dutch 320 squadron. The second belongs to the home team, the fighter collection, and it's also in RAF colours of 98 squadron. So here are some magnificent loose formations of these splendid aircraft.
But all the staff is covered there, all the tremendous power there, one can understand what they're going to do. It will be long, it will be hard, and there will be no.
This Boeing B-17 Fortress is one of two in Europe. She's called Sally B after her operator, Ellie Sallingboe, and she runs without benefit of a rich owner or of sponsorship. She's supported by her public appearances and by a huge supporters club of volunteers. She flies as a memorial to the 79,000 US airmen who lost their lives in Europe during World War II. The B-17 is one of the most important US warplanes of the war. Nearly 13,000 of them were built. But here's an interesting arrival back on the ground. It's one of the problems of landing these old tail draggers on those big balloon tyres. Get it wrong and you're off again. But beautifully recovered, so that the second touchdown is fine. Time for the big cat fighters from the Grumman stable to perform. This elegant feline is the Tiger Cat F7F, and these are two F8F Bearcats. An F6F Hellcat and an FM2 Wildcat. All of these aircraft were carrier-borne fighters which served mainly in the Pacific War with the US Navy. They all belong to the fighter collection. This actual Tiger Cat in the lead here served with the Marine Squadron VMD 354 at the end of the war. The two Bearcats on its wings were also delivered at the end of the war. Bearcat was the Navy's lightweight fighter. It was the smallest size that could accommodate the big Pratt & Whitney R2800 radial engine. 1,254 of them were built. Next it's the Hellcat, nearest to us, and Wildcat, or in these RAF colours, the Martlet as it was known. Back to Tiger and Bears, the Tiger Cat was fast, maximum speed at altitude 435 miles an hour, and despite its size, highly manoeuvrable. This is the only one flying in Europe. But the Bearcat was even faster, nearly 450 miles an hour at height. It was probably the fastest and most manoeuvrable piston engine fighter of all time. It was designed to get the Japanese kamikaze fighters. But of course this was the apogee of piston engines, because the next generation of fighters were jets. Hellcat was an earlier generation. It was designed in '42 and rushed into production. It was mass-produced at an unparalleled rate, and 11,000 of them were delivered in 2 years. Its arrival in the Pacific marked the turning point in that war. It was credited with 5,000 enemy aircraft destroyed. The US naval extravaganza continues with two Vought Corsairs, one belonging to the old Flying Machine Company, that's the one nearest to us, and the other to the fighter collection. At first, the British and Commonwealth forces took to the Corsair rather more readily than did the Americans. And in fact, these two aircraft are in Royal Navy colours, that's the one with the yellow nose, and Royal New Zealand Air Force colours. When the Corsair first flew in 1942, it became the first US warplane to go faster than 400 miles an hour. And the big 2,400 horsepower Pratt & Whitney radial engine needed a big propeller, and it was thought that that would make the undercarriage legs too long. That's why they adopted this cranked wing shape, or inverted gull wing. Corsair was extremely successful. They didn't stop making them till 1953, despite that being well into the age of the jet. In contrast to the grace of the Corsair, this astonishingly ugly aircraft was developed just after the war as the first combined dive bomber and torpedo bomber to be a single-seater. It's the Douglas Sky Raider, and in later life it added to its roles by becoming an airborne early warning and anti-submarine aircraft. More than 3,000 of them were made, and they became a mainstay of US naval aviation, and indeed US Air Force service in Vietnam. They continued in production until 1957, and many other air arms, in particular the French, used them. Ugly maybe, but highly effective. There was even at one time an air ambulance version of this. They made the fuselage even wider, and they put in a rear cabin which could carry 12 sitting patients or 4 stretchers. Not perhaps doing these kind of manoeuvres, though. Now, it's not all that unusual to see the Catalina at a show. We saw it at Fighter Meet. But to see two of them at once is very rare. The white Catalina belongs here at Duxford. You may remember its company is called Plain Sailing. And the other comes from Holland, where it belongs to a group called Cat Air. But lovely as the two Catalinas are, the high point of the Flying Legends show, the legendary climax if you like, comes with what they call the balbos at the end. The word balbo comes from the Spanish Civil War, when it was coined to describe the loose formations of aircraft that would congregate together before going in for a mass attack. Here, with no less than 31 aircraft, are the peaceful Flying Legends balbos.
Flying Legends. Well, there are several air shows at Duxford each year, and one added bonus for visitors is the new American Air Museum, which was opened in August by the Queen. And I think you were there, Sean. What's it like?
It's an amazing place. The building is designed by Sir Norman Foster, the man who designed Stansted Airport, and it fits into its surroundings extraordinarily well. It's got a completely glass front on the side that looks onto the airfield, and if you look at it from the airfield side, you can see everything inside the museum.
It's big enough to hold a B-52, I believe.
That's right. There's a B-52 in it, all 172-foot wingspan of it, and all sorts of American airplanes going all the way down to the Stearman biplanes and things like that. Some of them are suspended from the ceiling, some of them are on the ground. It really is an incredible collection.
Well, it sounds as if that's well worth a visit. Well, next we go to Fairford in Gloucestershire for what's claimed to be the world's biggest military air show. This year it drew record crowds. In fact, so many people were there on the Saturday that it took some of them 6 hours to get into the base and another 3 to get out in the evening. Well, I'm glad to say our cameras beat the rush, and here's a look at some of the highlights. The Royal International Air Tattoo is without doubt the premier event in the British Air Show calendar. This year there were more than 450 aircraft at Fairford and 200,000 people to see them. In its 26 years, the show has become established as a top social event for air crews. When the flying's over, the fun begins.
From when we started the Air Tattoo, we very much worked it to be a gathering of aviators. They fly military aeroplanes, but deep down they're aviators. And we've had many nations coming together over the years, and if you saw them last night in the bar together, from all parts of the world, drinking, telling stories, dancing, it's a gathering of like-minded people in a friendly environment.
The show always has two main themes. This year, like just about everyone else, they were celebrating the 50th anniversary of the United States Air Force. And the second theme was fighter aircraft, with both old and current types taking part in a cavalcade. So some of the aircraft here are the same ones as we've seen at the fighter meet earlier in the season. Royal IAT's fighter cavalcade starts with the First World War. And once again, here's that famous fighter, the Fokker triplane. This one, you'll remember, represents the aeroplane of Lieutenant Joseph Jacobs, and it's actually been repaired since its slight mishap at North Weald. Obviously performing well, but of course the weather is much better here. And the two British aeroplanes are those replica SE-5As. The Second World War saw the change from biplanes to monoplanes, here as ever represented by the Hurricane and the Spitfire. And we're flying in the cockpit of the Spitfire with Andy Sefton. Not for Andy, the bone dome of the modern fighter pilot. He likes to stay with the genuine, original old cloth and leather helmet. There was an even bigger quantum jump when the jet came along. For practical purposes, that was after the war. And jet experience in the Korean War was what sparked the ideas for this aircraft, one of the most famous fighters of the 50s and 60s. Despite its age, the F-104 is still in service around the world. The Italians still have 5 squadrons of them. Has an amazing performance for an aircraft with 40 years service behind it. Top speed of 1,450 miles an hour, more than twice the speed of sound. Another very famous fighter from the late 50s, still in service, here with the German Air Force, but also with the Israelis, among others. In fact, this particular aircraft's German squadron is Jagdgeschwader 71 Richthofen, which is named after the Red Baron, and the squadron call sign is Baron. This is the F-4 Phantom. It also saw service in both the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force. And in fact, it was the last big jet to fly off the Royal Navy's aircraft carriers before the Navy was temporarily reduced to flying only helicopters off ships. That was before the Harrier came along. We've moved along to the mid-60s with the Mirage F1, which by a strange piece of French logic was designed to replace the Mirage 3. Has the same top speed at altitude as the F-104, 1,450 miles an hour, but it's much more manoeuvrable and it's got better range and endurance, as well as being able to carry more weaponry. Dassault sold the F1 to about 11 other countries. Many F1s are still operational, this one with the Spanish Air Force's 142nd Air Defense Squadron. The Viggen brings us more up to date. This air defence fighter version is actually the last of 5 different versions, making the Viggen family truly multi-role. Fighter Viggen became operational with the Swedish Air Force in 1979. It's got a sophisticated radar that's designed to be effective even at very low altitudes. It carries a fearsome array of weapons, from medium-range Skyflash to short-range Sidewinders, as well as an automatic cannon which fires 22 explosive shells per second. The Su-30 is one of the many developments of the famous Su-27 fighter, which was the first Russian fighter to have so-called fly-by-wire computer controls instead of a manual flying control system. This model is an extended range version. Unlike the single-seat Su-27, it's got a crew of 2. It has such a sophisticated radar system that the back-seat crewman can actually use it as a sort of mini AWACS, airborne warning and control system, for controlling other fighters on interceptions and other tasks, because these days no fighter pilot operates on his own.
Well, staying with fighters, we're now going to look at one of the many national display teams at Fairford. The Turkish Stars made their first appearance here in 1996 in their F-5 Freedom Fighters. The type is also flown by the Patrice Swiss, who weren't at Fairford this year. But although the aircraft certainly looks the part, in many ways it isn't an ideal display aircraft. It was built for speed rather than manoeuvrability. Modern fighters like the F-16 have both, but the F-5 dates back to the 1960s and it has a rather large turning circle, which means that after each pass it takes a while for them to come round again. The Turks, though, are great showmen, and none more so than their eccentric team commentator, Captain Orhan Tamir.
You are watching Turkish Stars, ladies and gentlemen! Great, great! Oh, nice dears, like a rosette, boat rosette, great! Go, Lieutenant, Captain, go, go! Oh my goodness, what a nice rolling out! Great, congratulations! Congratulations, Lieutenant Colonel. I'm gonna tell your wife how great you were. When we return to home, I think she will be proud of you. Maybe kiss you, and so on.
The Turks' display was much enjoyed by spectators, but not so by the show organisers. The team was admonished for an unapproved sortie over the crowd. Breaches of safety rules are not taken lightly at Fairford, and it may be some time before we see them here again. To add to their problems, one of the aircraft developed an engine fault. The Stars did have a spare, and they worked through the afternoon to change it in time for their next display.
After landing, we had a small problem about left engine oil problem. There's a leaking under the aircraft. We want to repair our aircraft, okay? It's easy, I think.
The American theme continues with another appearance of the F-117A stealth fighter. We saw that earlier in the season at Mildenhall. But since the Royal IAT, an F-117 has crashed at an air show in Baltimore, and at the time of recording, all of the F-117s are grounded. But as at Mildenhall, the highlight of the Royal IAT was the arrival of the B-2A stealth bomber. This really is the most extraordinary aircraft. It does away with the F-117's facets, and it's all composed of complex curves, except for that distinctive trailing edge VWV shape. And no vertical surfaces at all. It's the genuine, unabridged flying wing. The aircraft with it are its F-15 escort fighters, without which it's not allowed to move, well, in this part of the world at any rate. But the real treat for the Royal IAT audience is that, unlike at Mildenhall, the Spirit is landing. It's never before been allowed to land in Britain in public, and that it does so on this occasion is a tribute to some quite amazing smooth talking and arm twisting by the directors of the Royal International Air Tattoo. Back to those curved surfaces, they're as effective in stealth terms as the older F-117's facets. And the great thing about this shape is it's a good flyer. It's more efficient, aerodynamically speaking, than many earlier aircraft, even the sleek B-1B bomber. This aircraft had flown direct from its home airfield at Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, taking on fuel from tankers over the Atlantic. And while it was on the ground, it kept at least one of its 4 engines running all the time.
The jet performed remarkably. Over 10 hours of flight, we didn't have one write-up, one maintenance problem at all. So that's fantastic. It's very, very automated. It only takes 2 guys to fly it, as you know. And one guy can fly if the other guy wants to take a little cat nap. We have a lot of human factors development going into flying those long durations. We'll have guys going to simulators, and based on the results we get from the simulator, we could take all those different factors, and then we train the air crews that are flying this 30 or 40-hour missions, so they know when to take a nap and how to stay fresh. And specifically, when you get ready to air refuel at night, or you get ready to drop bombs, you want to be at your peak. So they teach us how to get to that peak, so we can accomplish the job we set out to do.
So, after an hour or so on the ground, Spirit is off again on another 10-hour flight back to Whiteman. With time first, though, for another accompanied fly-past. As it comes towards us, you can see it's even quite stealthy to the naked eye, difficult to see. And interestingly enough, its wingspan at 172 feet is nearly as big as the mighty B-52. In length, it's only a bit bigger than the F-15 fighter.
Well, all the aircraft here at Fairford arrive in the 3 days before the show, and that means a big job for air traffic control. With no radar here, they rely on colleagues at nearby Bryce Norton. Bryce is a main transport and tanker base, with controlled airspace extending up to 3,500 feet. The controllers handle traffic well outside the boundary.
Sierra 371, turn right to head 130.
In their darkened room below the tower, these radar controllers can see aircraft up to 50 miles away. Normally their job is to guide planes to and from Bryce and to provide separations from other traffic passing through the area. But today a whole section of the radar room is handling movements into Fairford. One problem is that many foreign pilots are not familiar with local procedures. Some of them speak little English.
Hungarian 335, negative, turn left, heading 100.
The language is obviously a problem, although the universal language of air traffic is English. However, the instrumentation of various aircraft from different countries is different. The instructions have to be given differently, and their interpretations of the words we say could be different as well. So yes, it does give us a problem. We have to speak very clearly and slowly.
200 miles away at Leaming in Yorkshire, our own flight is setting off for Fairford. Cameraman Steve Dan is flying in an RAF Hawk of 100 Squadron. His task is to film aircraft arriving for the show. The Hawk is an ideal plane for this. It's fast enough to keep up with the large jets, and the cockpit gives good visibility.
It's like the sports car of the fast jet world, if you like. It doesn't have the same weapon capabilities of the frontline fighters and bombers, but we can simulate a lot of aircraft with this aeroplane, and it acts like a fast jet, basically.
Our Hawk takes off and heads for Fairford. Controllers assign it a transponder code, 4666. Our call sign is Romeo 94.
Romeo 94, Fairford director, turn right heading 360.
The Hawk is vectored towards a Hungarian MiG-29 on its way to the show. Controllers ask the pilot if he's happy for our plane to come alongside.
Hungarian 335, and a Hawk aircraft to the south of you by 5 miles, maintaining flight level 70, wishes to take some photographs. Are you happy for him to join at your level?
Roger. I affirm. And Hawk is inside. Right now behind us.
Moments later, the radar blips merge as the two aircraft form mate. As Andy Hurd looks after the flying, Steve gets his pictures. Soon it's time for the MiG to begin its descent into Fairford. Back at base, the Hawk will now refuel for its next sortie. For Andy Hurd, it's all in a day's work. For visiting pilots, the radar chase comes as no surprise.
I think most of them expect it. They're coming to the International Air Tour, or the Royal International Air Tour, and therefore they are going to expect to be filmed by a number of cameras, let alone one in the air.
Most aerobatic teams fly trainer aircraft, and here's the exception that proves the rule. The Ukrainian Falcons fly the very much frontline MiG-29. And this is a new team, not just at Fairford. It was only formed in the autumn of '96, and it did its first display in May '97 near Kiev, which is of course the capital of Ukraine. And what a grand sight it is to see 6 of these 15-ton monsters flying in neat triangle formation. Well, I call them monsters, but that's just the size. Recently, at any rate, the Russians do seem to have had an amazing facility for producing good-looking aeroplanes with clean, graceful lines. And here's the Russian trademark, the tail slide. It's difficult to see against the featureless blue sky, but the aircraft is actually going backwards here before tumbling over and pointing down. The pilots are all test pilots, mostly from the State Scientific and Testing Aviation Centre. They number 4 full colonels, 1 lieutenant colonel and 1 major. A senior bunch. And here's confirmation, if we needed it, that the Cold War is dead and buried. 5 Russian-built Ukrainian MiG-29s fly an arrow formation over a waiting American B-1B intercontinental bomber.
Well, from the mighty MiGs of the Ukrainian Falcons, we go to the tiny Fouga Magisters of the Irish Air Corps. The Silver Swallows were also making their Fairford debut.
It's quite a small air arm. It's only about 1,000 personnel all told. And Light Strike Squadron, which supplies the aerobatic team, only have 6 aircraft. So this year is our 75th anniversary. So because of that, we're getting to do an awful lot of shows. So around the UK and around Ireland and in Europe. So it's great to be here in Fairford. It's a beautiful airplane to fly. Yeah, it's very sleek, quite nice. It fits like a glove. It's got obviously two engines. There's 400 knots is our max speed. So it's got all you want except powers of reserve for formation aerobatics. But it's a nice airplane to fly.
The Swallows won the prize for the best team performance. Our cameras flew with them, and Graham Martin now takes us through the action.
There's a stopwatch being hit now for our timing. So we get an accurate time, and bang, overhead. Climbing along, approximately 15 seconds we go away from the crowd, depending on the wind, before we pull up into about a 4G, pulling straight up into a starboard wing over. So round about now, there's the pull up, there's a G piling on. Look over my right shoulder there to pick up the axis. I'm rolling starboard all the way around. We get the top here, we're doing about 140 knots. We climb to about 2,700 feet. Look back, got to find the reference, and then depending where the reference is, we got to pull the maneuver tighter. Today we have to pull it a bit tighter, about 3.5 G. And we're descending now, looking for our first maneuver. So we go from here to wings level, and I pick up the reference, looking for 300 knots for the first loop, onto reference, a few seconds, and there we go. Pulling straight back on the stick, looking to get 4G on the clock, constant G all the way around. We have a slight on-crowd wind today, so we have a slight wing low away from the crowd in order to maintain our displacement. Over the top, looking back, finding the horizon again, looking forward, straight down again now. Again, we're looking for 280 knots this time, 500 feet. Same amount of G piling on all the way back to 4G, and we're on max G round about now. You can see the crowd just there behind me. Got to look back, find the horizon again. Once I have the horizon, I have my reference points. Ease off. About 3,000 feet we gain here. Speed back to 140 knots. And we come over the top, descending. Bottom out again at 500 feet. So coming back down. This is a spectacular maneuver here. You might see the wingman, again, Paul Whelan. It's called a rollback. And he'll go to max G, up to 6G, stress the airplane and roll away, and they come back into a new formation called arrow. So a couple of seconds now, you'll see him pull up, There he goes, and they're up. They roll around, and they fall back onto the number 4, and they're just gone out of view now because they're actually formating on the guy behind me. I'm running on line here now. In a moment, I'm going to go inverted. There you go, up, check, roll. And you can see there, just over the top of the canopy, Lieutenant Christian Keegan, the number 4, and he's coming right in. He's getting so close that you just can't see him now because he's right behind my head. And it's a mirror pass, so I'm pushing there all the time. You can see the straps hanging upside down. 20 seconds is our max. You can see him moving back slightly there, just over behind my head. And push minus 3.5 G all the way around. Back on to positive G, up to 6 there, so it's quite a lot of G to go from this negative to positive like that.
The Silver Swallows. Well, here's a team of Fairford regulars. The Royal Jordanian Falcons gave a first-class display in their extra 300s. But just a week after this appearance, disaster struck. At the Flanders show in Belgium, their solo pilot, Omar Bilal, lost control of his aircraft and plunged into the crowd, killing himself and 8 people on the ground. The accident has once again raised questions about airshow safety. A tragic end to the Flanders Airshow, and that accident is still under investigation. Well, back to Fairford, the undoubted highlight of the show was the B-2 stealth bomber. But a few weeks later, we heard some extraordinary press reports from America. It was suggested that the aircraft's anti-radar paint coating was ineffective in the rain, and that the plane can't operate in either very hot or very cold conditions. Sean, is that true?
Well, I think there was some exaggeration by the tabloids here. I mean, on the question of rain, it doesn't have to operate in the rain. Part of the point of a stealth bomber or fighter is that it can stay at height. It doesn't have to come down to the levels where the rain is. And furthermore, the bomber doesn't have to go anywhere where rain is. It can stay at its home base, and it can operate all over the world from its home base in Missouri. So I think some of these reports were a bit exaggerated.
So you think it's still going to be an effective part of the American Air Force?
Absolutely. It'll take them on into the next century, you know, for as long as they want it, really.
Well, our next show couldn't be more different. From the big jets of Fairford, we go to Woburn in Bedfordshire for a look at aviation as it used to be. There couldn't be a more perfect setting for a show like this. The de Havilland Moth Club's annual rally takes place in the grounds of Woburn Abbey, and the ancient deer park seems just the place for a day out with a biplane. This isn't an everyday airfield. The 500-yard strip is specially prepared for the event, and it runs north-south, so there's usually a crosswind. With these vintage tailwheel aircraft, anything more than 8 to 10 knots can be a bit of a handful, but Moth pilots are real aviators, and most of them can cope. Except for a few guest appearances, the event is restricted to de Havilland types. Geoffrey de Havilland was one of the pioneers of the British aircraft industry, and planes like the Rapide were the first to offer serious transportation in the years between the wars. But it was the Tiger Moth that proved to be the company's most enduring design. Nearly 9,000 were built, and some 900 still survive, many in Canada, Australia and the United States.
The Tiger Moth's success is mainly due to its commission by the Air Ministry. For many years it was the RAF's primary trainer. But it's not an easy aircraft to handle, especially on the ground, and mishaps are quite common, as witnessed at this event a couple of years ago. Fortunately, such incidents rarely result in injury. You can still learn to fly in a Tiger Moth. There's a club at Cambridge which offers a PPL course. It'll probably take you longer to go solo than in a modern nose-wheel aircraft. But Tiger folk say the discipline of handling a tail dragger will make you a better pilot in the end. In any case, learning speed does not always indicate a new pilot's potential.
Some of the most famous pilots in the British Air Force were a long time in training. For example, Stanford Tuck was a very famous fighter pilot during the war, was almost giving up ever flying, and on his final thing, I think it took him about 19 hours to eventually go solo. But he was one that was nearly thrown out, and they developed later on into an excellent pilot. So some guys learn quickly and then seem to lose it all. Other guys take time and become aces.
Richard Teverson's Tiger is the plane he learned to fly in. He lost touch with it, then found it at the back of a hangar in Liverpool and bought it. 31 years later, he has more than 1,000 hours on type and many flying stories. There have been 5 forced landings and a minor incident in France.
The runway I'd hoped to use was actually being repaired and got barrels all over it, and the rest of the grass was covered with bales, and the only runway was a crosswind runway, tarmac, about 10-15 knot crosswind, which I knew with the Tiger that's almost impossible, especially this Tiger, especially when it's heavily loaded in the back. So I kept it straight as long as possible on the wheels, and then round it went and up onto the wingtip, but it didn't do too much damage.
Before the appearance of more powerful types like the Pitt Special, moths were widely used in aerobatic competitions. The aircraft are extremely strong, though with ailerons on only one pair of wings, the roll rate is poor by modern standards. This freestyle competition attracts some of the best moth pilots around. This Australian-built Tiger is flown by Barry Tempest, who has a day job with the CAA. The show is reminiscent of those great Hendon displays between the wars. Fort bombing is much more difficult than it looks, and definitely not to be tried by the novice. There's also a limbo act here performed by a jackaroo. This is a rare aircraft. 25 were built, only 2 survive. The cabin version of the Tiger Moth just never caught on. Well, the best known Tiger act is of course the Diamond 9. The team have been at events throughout the summer, but sadly their show here was stopped by the estate's owners. The display line overflies a stud farm, and it was felt that a whole team of tigers might disturb the horses. So, after a brief flypast, the Diamond 9 went off to display at Old Warden. Perhaps there'll be a change of heart next year. Well, now a look at some of the other types here at Woburn. The DH-60 moth predates the DH-82 Tiger. It's easily identified by the exhaust pipe which runs along the side of the fuselage. And incidentally, the longer pipe makes it much quieter than the Tiger Moth. The Puss Moth was made famous by the great Jim Mollison, who flew his across the South Atlantic. This example, owned by Tim Williams, has also made some long trips. In 1984, it flew to Australia. Around 100 Puss Moths were built, but in the early days its steel tube frame caused problems,
and there were some cases of wings separating in flight. However, the design was fixed. The Foxmoth first flew in 1932 and was used mostly for joyrides. The pilot braves the wind while his 4 passengers ride in comfort in their own cabin. It's worth noting that it has the same gypsy engine as the Tiger Moth. There aren't many aircraft which carry 5 people on just 130 horsepower. There's no doubt that many of these fine aircraft would have had more success but for the recession of the 1930s. This monoplane Leopard Moth was built in 1934. Only around 100 were sold, though the 3-seater did see airline service in India. Now owned by Henry Labouchere, this example was retained by de Havilland and used as a communications aircraft during the Second World War. The Hornet Moth was designed as a touring trainer, but unusually it had side-by-side seating. Of course, nowadays this is the norm for civilian training aircraft, though at the time the tandem seating arrangement seems to have been preferred. As a tourer, the aircraft lacks baggage room because the fuel tank is behind the seats. Around 25 examples survive around the world. Well, now to the real transports. This DH-84 Dragon is owned by Aer Lingus, which used the type for its first passenger services. Long after their retirement, this one was bought as a mascot and hung in the terminal building at Dublin. Enter J.J. Sullivan, a retired 747 captain. Amid fears that the decaying aircraft might plunge into the passenger hall, J.J. pressed for its restoration. It was completed in time to mark the airline's Golden Jubilee in 1986. With J.J. as chief pilot, the Dragon now flies around 60 hours a year. It's been to several shows in Britain and also carries out pleasure flights. The Dragon was originally an 8-seater, but at high weights it can't maintain altitude on one engine. For this reason they take no more than 5 passengers, or 4 if crossing the Irish Sea. The Dragon is one of only 3 to remain in flying condition, and the only one in Europe. Less rare is the Dragon Rapide. It's a more advanced design than the Dragon, and with 200 horsepower Gypsy Queen engines, it's also more powerful. The Rapide was designed by Arthur Hagg, and with its tapered wings and general lack of straight lines, it was a production designer's nightmare. It was, however, the flagship of many pre-war airlines, besides being used by the RAF as a navigation and wireless trainer. That version was known as the Dominie. 3 Rapides flew here at Woburn. The lead aircraft is owned by former British aerobatic champion Philip Meeson. Pete Thorne and Colin Dodds make up the formation. Like many vintage aircraft, the Rapide could once have been bought for next to nothing. High maintenance costs meant that many were needlessly scrapped. Today a good example would cost close to £200,000. But here's an aircraft that money couldn't buy. It's the only one of its type in flying condition. Its owner says he'd never sell it, and as he's a millionaire, he doesn't need to. The gorgeous Dragonfly is a scaled-down Rapide with a beefed-up main spar. It's cleaner and much more elegant.
It was built as the kind of Learjet of the 30s. It was a private aeroplane for a pilot and an owner to fly around in. It wasn't really used as a commercial plane, although the oil companies used it for communications and so on. But of the 63 that were built, I think 2 of the early ones went to the King of Iraq. I think the Duke of Gloucester had one. Philip Sassoon, and I mean all the kind of knobs had them in those days. Lowell Guinness. It was the creme de la creme of sort of aeroplanes to go to the south of France in.
63 built and only one left. Does that suggest maybe that it's a bit cantankerous to handle?
Well, I think it did get itself a reputation in the early days because it has a rather small rudder and a very wide fuselage, and the old braking system was very difficult to handle. You really needed 3 hands to make it all work. And so a lot of them were lost by simply ground looping on takeoff or landing. In fact, this one I bought from after it had ground looped on takeoff in Louisville, Kentucky, and flown into an 8-foot ditch and was sort of matchwood, so I picked it up quite cheap, and then we spent 5 years rebuilding it. It's a lovely, gentle aeroplane to fly. It cruises about 115 miles an hour, and it has a huge range, about 650 miles.
And I believe that you actually do use her. She doesn't just hang around and do the odd air show, you take her places.
Oh yeah, we go everywhere in it. I go to Italy most years and around Europe. A couple of years ago we flew it to Oshkosh for her 60th birthday present, which is in Wisconsin, to the big air show there. Unfortunately, we didn't get there because it broke about 300 miles short in Bowling Green, Ohio, so we had to leave it there over the winter, repair it. And then a friend of mine, Henry Labouchere, and I flew it back again last year after going to Oshkosh, and we had the most wonderful trip. So we actually got 2 adventures for the price of 1, if you know what I mean.
Well, if the Dragonfly meant luxury, this aircraft meant speed. The Mildenhall was designed by Edgar Percival, but its gypsy engine qualifies it for an appearance here. The Mildenhall was built to break records. Modifications gave it a top speed of almost 250 miles per hour, and in 1939 Alex Henshaw flew it from Gravesend to Cape Town and back in 4 days and 19 hours, a record for its class that's never been broken. It's now owned by former test pilot Des Penrose. Another non-de Havilland aircraft, also unique, is this Blackburn B-2. The story of the Blackburn shows the huge influence of the Air Ministry in the early development of British aviation. The B-2 was designed in competition to the Tiger Moth, and indeed there was a fly-off to decide which should be ordered by the RAF. The 2 aircraft had similar performance, but, possibly because of its side-by-side seating, the Blackburn lost the battle. As a result, only 40 were built. And here's a guest appearance from a fairy swordfish of the Royal Naval Historic Flight. We've seen this aircraft at many shows this summer, but somehow the Woburn setting, though it's about as far from the sea as you can get in Britain, seems the right place for this lovely old biplane. W5856 is one of 2 swordfish based at Yeovilton. The other has a sick engine and isn't flying at the moment. The only 2 others are both in Canada. Despite its benign appearance and slow speed, the old stringbag played an important part in many naval actions of World War II. Its torpedoes destroyed more than 20 U-boats, and 1 disabled the dreaded Bismarck. As a result, the German battleship was caught and sunk by British destroyers. Today, its mock torpedo probably carries beer, though not, of course, for drinking on duty. The Swordfish is flown by Commander Phil Shaw. A former helicopter instructor, one of his students was Prince Andrew. Well, this is not a big show, but in my view it's one of the very best. The organisers and pilots come purely for the love of aeroplanes, not to make money or to fuel their egos, and that's why there's such a lovely atmosphere. So let's wish them well for next year and hope they don't have too much of a crosswind.
The next event was to have been the new Air Day Wales at Cardiff International Airport. But at the last minute, the show was cancelled because it would have coincided with the funeral of Diana, Princess of Wales. The following day, the Shepway show went ahead as planned, although the tragic events did not go unremarked. Shepway is a seaside air show, and it's usually the culmination of a whole weekend of entertainment called the Shepway Festival, with a seafront fireworks display on the Friday and an all-day celebration of motoring on the Saturday. All of that was cancelled this year, but after a lot of heart-searching, Shepway District Council, they organised the whole festival, and they decided to go ahead with the air show. So on the Sunday, the day after the Princess's funeral, it was a slightly subdued crowd that thronged the clifftop vantage point to see the aircraft. There was a special tribute to the Princess of Wales, led by a Royal Air Force Harrier, and ending in a minute's silence. The air show's in two parts, and the hour before lunch was rounded off by the gentle but highly professional display of the French Patrouille Adecco. These three pilots, Jacques Bautelin, Jean-Louis Giordano and Michel-Hugo Véran, had been flying as a team since 1982. They used to be the Martini team, La Patrouille Martini, but a new French law on drink advertising put a stop to that. Fortunately, the ECHO Temporary Employment Agency stepped in as sponsors, and they've remained there for the team through a name change to Adecco. And even if temps don't have quite the same glamour as Martini, the team is as good as ever. Those little pods under the wings of their Swiss-built Pilatus PC-7 turboprop trainer aircraft are electrical smoke generators. Most teams squirt diesel into the engine exhaust to make smoke, but that only gives one smoke trail per aircraft instead of Adecco's two, which beautifully delineate their bomb burst. And as these two race towards us at 250 miles an hour, their crossover is so accurate that their smoke trails actually get tangled up. Well, it is the seaside, so it's only right and proper for the Royal Navy to be here. This is the Westland Aerospatiale Lynx anti-submarine helicopter. Although I have to say that this doesn't exactly look like the kind of manoeuvre that you'd need for fighting submarines. I didn't think helicopters could do that sort of thing. But Lieutenant Commander Kevin Potts of 815 Naval Air Squadron is obviously out to demonstrate how agile this Anglo-French helicopter is. Not only that, but a version of Lynx holds the helicopter world speed record of nearly 250 miles an hour. As it comes towards us, note its little tricycle undercarriage, a bit like supermarket trolley wheels. And it also has a little harpoon thing in the middle, so when it gets down onto a rolling ship's deck, it spears a grating in the deck to hold itself down. But by contrast, the Lynx in the middle here comes from the Army. It doesn't have wheels, it has skids. This is the only helicopter display team in Europe, the Army's Blue Eagles with the Lynx and 4 Gazelles. Now, over the sea there are no landmarks so that you can make sure you're coming in on the right angle. It's all rather difficult.
We don't like making a habit of flying over the sea. I think last year was the first time we've done it for a long time. Well, there's very little references out there at all, and there may be the odd boat, but the next time you see that boat, it's moved. Yeah, it's totally different. The helicopter's not exactly stable, not like a fast jet that's got, because of its speed and its weight, it's fairly stable. The helicopter's designed to be unstable, so it is extremely difficult, yes.
The Army is obviously keen to demonstrate that its Lynx is just as agile as the Navy's. And one of the Eagle's specialities is the dramatic crossover. But actually, the Army Lynx's manoeuvres have been a bit toned down from what they were a year or so ago. They used to do a thing called a backflip, which looked for all the world like a somersault. But although there was no suggestion that it was dangerous, they realised that it was not a manoeuvre that had been specifically cleared in test flying by the manufacturer. So to be on the safe side, they dropped it. Disappointing for the audience, but indicative of the professional approach of the display teams. Another civilian team now. Paul Bonhomme rolls upside down into the so-called mirror formation on Warwick Brady. And these two are the Sukhoi duo with two Russian Su-29 two-seaters. And this is the inside-outside turn, with Paul Bonhomme undergoing 4 or 5 negative G. That's to say he's being pushed out of his seat, into his harness, with a force at least 4 times his own weight, say 1/3 of a ton. And the blood is rushing to his head, making his vision go pink, and if he's not careful, making him collapse from the infamous red out. Back the right way up, and as they head towards us, just watch this. We'll concentrate on Warwick Brady now. You can see he's in the back seat, no one in the front. One thing that distinguishes Russian aircraft is the engine. That impressive growl comes from the 360 horsepower 9-cylinder radial Vedenev engine. Quite a different sound from the equivalent American Lycomings and the like. Russian aircraft have an enviable reputation in the world of aerobatics, with that sort of agility stemming in part from extremely light weight combined with almost unbelievable strength. The empty weight is a mere 1,230 pounds, less than a Mini, but it can easily withstand 10 G, positive or negative. Well, many of the aircraft here, like the B-17 Flying Fortress, have been entertaining us at other shows up and down the country. But it's all a bit different in a seaside setting.
the Shepway Air Show. Well, that brings us back to where we started. Lucas is the RAF's one remaining Battle of Britain Air Show. It's held, of course, in September, the month that marked the turning point in that great campaign of 1940, the RAF's finest hour.
The RAF, of course, used to hold similar shows at Biggin Hill and at Finningley. Well, the Biggin show is now no longer an RAF event, and Finningley has closed. But Lucas is still an active RAF station, and for the Scots, this is the major show of the year.
You certainly get the feeling here that you're in Scotland. It's freezing cold, the air is clear, and even the roar of jets can't drown the sound of the pipes. The Scots have something to celebrate. 2 days before the show, they voted for their own parliament. But though Lucas is home to 2 frontline Tornado squadrons, most of the air power here today comes from England. Since this is an RAF show, we'll be taking a look at the main types currently operated by the Air Force. But there's also an international presence, and we start with La Patrie de France. The French national display team are favourites in Britain. We've seen them at several shows this year in their lovely Alpha jets. Unusually for a jet trainer, this aircraft has 2 engines. Most have only 1. For some years, La Patrie de France flew frontline fighters like the Super Sabre and the Ouragan, but that's very expensive for a display team. The Alpha jet was built as a joint venture between Dassault of France and Dornier of Germany. La Patrie have had them since 1981. Well, because of some low patchy cloud, they're flying their low show today. This is the standard formation. They call it the diamond, although actually it's not quite a diamond because there are only 8 of them, and that leaves a hole at the back. Now we see them in triangle formation, changing back into diamond. And as they go past, you can see under the wings the words Armée de l'Air. That, of course, means simply Air Force. Now here comes their party piece. 7 of the aircraft roll inverted, not all together though. First 1 pair, then another 3, then another pair. That leaves just the leader flying the right way up. Coming up now, one of their formation breaks, the rolling split. Now 6 of them back in formation in line astern. Well, as I mentioned, the French team changed from fighters to trainers because of cost. But actually, the Alpha jet wasn't their first trainer. That was the Fouga Magister. And as we saw at Fairford, the Magister is still on the display circuit in the hands of the Irish Air Corps Silver Swallows. Considering they live so close, we haven't seen much of the Swallows in Britain, so it's worth having a closer look at them, especially as this is their very last display here, at least as a 4-ship formation. More of this in a moment. The Magister really is a delightful little aircraft. Like the Alpha jet, it has 2 engines, but of very low power. Less than 1,000 pounds of thrust from each engine. That's only about 1% of the power put out by today's largest jet engines. However, the Magister has just about enough power for formation aerobatics, And because the airframe is so light and clean, it has a top cruising speed of 400 knots. Not bad considering its low power. These aircraft are also used as everyday trainers, and the pilots are all full-time instructors. Now, the Magister doesn't look very warlike, but in fact one version was equipped to fly from French aircraft carriers, and it's also been used as a light ground attack aircraft. In fact, the Israelis had some success with it back in the 1960s. The Swallows have been doing several shows this year to mark the Irish Air Corps' 75th anniversary. We might have seen more of them in the past, but for the cost of operating a regular air display team. The Swallows really are a budget operation. They don't even use smoke because it's too expensive, and that's fair enough for such a small air arm. But the sad thing is that these aircraft are now reaching the end of their service life, and with no replacement in sight, the team is fighting to stay in business.
Well, we're going to retire 2 airplanes this year, and we're hoping that next year, with a fleet of 4, we could possibly come up with a 3-ship display. There's a lot of enthusiasm for it at home and abroad, and I think worst case scenario would be a 2-ship display, just to keep the name alive for at least another 2 seasons. That's what we're going to hope for. But certainly this year is the last year you're going to see 4 Fugger Magisters.
Now, why do they have to retire? They still look in pretty good shape.
Yeah, they're in superb condition actually. They're well underutilised hours-wise, but unfortunately the companies won't insure them, or not insure them, we're guaranteed their service life past 2 years ago actually, and we had a special extension to bring us up to now. So the airplanes are extremely airworthy, but just out of hours.
Sad that, sad for the Swallows and sad for us, but not surprising perhaps, because it's 45 years since the Magister came into service as a basic trainer. And now this aircraft does the same job for the present-day Royal Air Force. The dramatic colour scheme is not entirely for show. The Air Force has discovered that black is very good for visibility in the air. They've even coined a word for it, conspicuity. Don't you just love the military? And of course, all aircraft, but especially trainers, need to be seen by other aircraft. Well, I say all aircraft, but of course stealthy ones don't, and guess what? They're black too. Oh well. Anyway, that's the black bit. Those yellow bits, they're just for show, because this is the RAF's official display Tucano, and very natty it looks too. The official display pilot is Flight Lieutenant Jace Hawker of No. 1 Flying Training School at Linton-on-Ouse. And of course the other thing about this basic trainer is it's not a jet, but a turboprop. But it handles pretty much like a jet, and here Jace Hawker is piling on the negative G in an outside turn. That was the basic trainer. These are the advanced trainers, somewhat older than the Tucano, but with the same stepped-up cockpit layout, which makes it easy to transfer from Tucano to these, the Hawks. Same colour scheme as well, and in fact the reason there are 2 of them is that the one in front is the display aircraft with the display pilot, Flight Lieutenant Andy Lewis, aboard, while the other one is the spare, and that's often used as the static display aircraft. We see them leaving Lucas to return to their home station at RAF Valley in Anglesey. Of course this is the same aircraft that the Red Arrows fly, but it does look rather different in this colour scheme. Now this aircraft is very much frontline operational, witness its successes in the Gulf War. But it's got the same engine as the trainer Hawk we saw just now, except that this, the Jaguar, has 2 of them. Not only that, but they've got reheat. And that puts the Adour engine's thrust up from just over 5,000 pounds to more than 8,500 pounds. So, as Jaguar is quite a small aircraft, its wing is smaller than a Tornado's tailplane, it's got a good power-to-weight ratio. Have you noticed, though, that when it's got its wheels down, it looks a bit like a duck? Anyway, here's Flight Lieutenant Mark Cutmore demonstrating what they call aerodynamic braking to slow himself down without using the brakes. And here is the Tornado, variable sweep-back wings fully forward for takeoff, with the rails for Sidewinder missiles under the wings and the racks for Skyflash under the fuselage. As this is the F3 fighter version, or to be more correct, the long-range interceptor version. An indication of how much bigger it is than the Jaguar is that its maximum all-up weight is 28 tons, as opposed to the Jaguar's 15. But Flight Lieutenant Pete Hackett is not concerned with all-up weight as he rolls, still with the wings fully forward, at 25 degrees of sweepback. But now, coming in from the right, is the bomber version, the GR1, at not far off the speed of sound, with the wings fully swept back at 60 degrees of sweepback. It looks much more Dart-like with the wings fully swept. And now here's Flight Lieutenant Mike Baverstock bringing the GR1 in with the wings forward again and all the low-speed aids out, the droops, slats on the front of the wing and the flaps all the way along the trailing edge. Having those full-span flaps means no ailerons, so they have to be combined with the elevators on the tailplane, where they're called tailerons. Another aircraft with lots of weapons racks under the wings now, the Harrier GR7, demonstrating first of all that it performs just like any other modern jet fighter. In fact, quite a spirited aerobatic display from Flight Lieutenant Clive Soph. But now the parts of the show that other aircraft can't reach. Jet fighters aren't supposed to be able to hover, and in fact no other operational fighter in the world can do this. You can see how it does it because there's the jet blast going vertically down so that Harrier's balanced on a pillar of so-called vectored thrust. And to vector that thrust from the conventional backwards facing jet exhaust to the downwards position, Clive just moves a single lever in the cockpit. Simplicity itself. And this is shaping up to be what Harrier folk call a rolling vertical landing. But for the benefit of the display, Clive just kisses the runway and he's off again on more miracle vectored thrust from the Rolls-Royce Pegasus engine. It's the big boys now. It takes a crew of 13 to operate the Nimrod MR3P, but for an air display they usually cut that down to 7. As with most maritime patrol aircraft, it's festooned with all sorts of bits and bobs. The bulge on the tail fin is for anti-radar missile equipment. The probe at the front is for air refuelling, and the little extra fins on the tailplane are because the refuelling probe made the beast a bit unstable. The pods on the wingtips are for electronic warfare, and the big pod on the right wing is a 70 million candle power searchlight. The sting sticking out of the tail is anti-submarine magnetic anomaly detector, or MAD for short. And you can't even see the most important thing, the search water radar and the enormous computing power that goes with it. But Squadron Leader Taylor Devlin is still able to put this 87-ton monster into a vertical bank. From head on, Nimrod reminds us of its ancestry. No one puts engines in wings like that anymore. But that was how they did it for the world's first jetliner, the Comet, way back in the late 40s. Nimrod was developed from the last model of the Comet, but it'll still be flying in the 21st century. A real classic from the same era as that first Comet jetliner now, the original Hunter prototype first flew in 1951. We've seen other Hunters at other shows, and that's kind of encouraging because it means there are quite a lot of them around on the display circuits. This splendid two-seater T7A used to be on the strength of RAF Lossiemouth to train Buccaneer pilots. Well, the Buccaneers are gone, but the Hunter soldiers on. It's in the colours of the famous Black Arrows formation of Treble 1 Squadron, and it's now operated by Delta Engineering. Well, I've said before that pilots seem to have an ongoing love affair with the Hunter. Well, this is one who just can't believe his luck that they're still together after all these years.
I left the Air Force about 15 years ago thinking I'd never see a Hunter again, and it's been a delight to get back in the old lady.
Now, you're also working for the CAA as the man who oversees safety at civilian air shows, but here you are displaying. Do you have any difficulty reconciling those two particular pastimes?
Well, I'm not wearing my tie, so I'm poaching today. When I wear my tie, I'm gamekeeping. No, I mean, obviously, one has to be fairly obviously stick to the rules as closely as one can. But I've had to occasionally give myself a rap on the knuckles.
The music of 6 Merlin engines heralds the arrival of the Battle of Britain memorial flight. (1997) is actually the BBMF's 40th birthday year, and the various aeroplanes have celebrated with more than 300 displays and flypasts in the season. The Lancaster shows off its battle honours. All of the so-called nose art represents raids, aircraft downs, crew decorations, and much else. And the white on the fins means the aircraft was a flight leader. All of that colour scheme is actually of Lancaster J for Johnny of number 9 Squadron. The flight's got 4 Spitfires, 2 Mark 19s with the big Griffon engine, and 2 of what they call the baby Spits with Merlin engines. This Mark 5 saw distinguished service with the South Africans. These colours are of 222 Natal Squadron, and she also served with Indian, Canadian and American Eagle Squadrons. There are 2 BBMF Hurricanes, one's being rebuilt after an engine failure and crash landing in 1991, and this one, which was the last of more than 14,500 Hurricanes built. This colour scheme represents number 261 Squadron when it was defending Malta in 1940, and it commemorates the people of the RAF's Middle East Air Force. The memorial flight's a highly popular RAF display team, but this is probably the best known team. We saw them at the beginning of the season in rotten weather. Since then, the Red Arrows have done more than 60 full shows, with rather more than usual actually being cancelled because of bad weather. Here's the classic playing card Diamond 9 shape. The Reds have made this their trademark formation, and they base much of their display on it. But it changes all the time. This shape's called Eurofighter, showing the newest European fighter's little canard wing at the front and the big delta at the back. Once they split the main formation into 2 parts, this one's Jippo, you may recall, they get up to some interesting rolling manoeuvres. This is called corkscrew, and you don't often see it from this angle. Who's which way up, I ask myself. And then there's the amazing Jippo double brake. After that, they split down further so that the so-called synchro pair can do their opposition crossovers, closing speed more than 700 miles an hour. And finally, as always, the spine-tingling and photogenic Vixen brake.
So the Red Arrows and the Glenalmond College Pipe Band bring to an end the Battle of Britain Air Show.
Well, that's all from us. We'll leave you with some highlights of this great year of British aviation. From Lucas in Scotland, goodbye.
Goodbye.